Hey there, knowledge seekers. So, you know how sometimes you look at like something huge GE and successful like the American economy and you wonder like how did that even happen? Well, we're going to break that down today and really get into the nuts and bolts of what makes this economic engine run.
Yeah, it's a question a lot of people ask for sure. And it's interesting because it's not just about resources or money, right? It's a much deeper story about how this unique set of conditions all came together, almost like uh, the perfect recipe for economic growth.
All right, so you've got me intrigued. We're diving into an article called The Secret of America's Economic Success today, and I got to admit, just skimming it, I was surprised by how central geography is to the whole thing. Like, I mean, we all know the U.S. is huge, tons of natural resources, but this goes way beyond that.
Yeah, you're right. It's about how the layout of the land itself shaped early trade routes, settlement patterns, even the types of industries that took off. Think about those massive navigable rivers, right? They were like nature's highways moving goods and people long before railroads or cars even existed. And then, of course, you've got access to oceans on both sides. Huge for international trade.
Yeah, it makes you realize how much we take that for granted today.
Yeah.
So we've got this land, like just full of potential. But then the article dives into something that's equally important, which is the Constitution. It's almost like it set the stage for everything that followed.
Oh, absolutely. The way the Constitution emphasized individual liberties, property rights, and limited government, it basically created this environment where businesses could just flourish.
Yeah.
It gave people the confidence to invest, to innovate, knowing that their efforts wouldn't just be arbitrarily seized or controlled.
Yeah, which is such a contrast to a lot of other economic systems around the world, right?
Hmm.
So you've got the land, you've got these like rules of the game. But then, of course, there's another piece of the puzzle, the people.
Oh, absolutely. You can't talk about the American economy without talking about immigration. I mean, just wave after wave of people coming from all over the world, bringing their skills, their cultures, their hunger to succeed. I mean, think about Silicon Valley, for instance. So much of its success is tied to the contributions of immigrants.
It's like this constant influx of new ideas and energy, right?
Yeah.
Always pushing things forward. But here's something I found really fascinating in the article. It talks about how American culture views failure,
Hmm.
not as this like shameful thing, but as a learning experience, a
Yeah.
stepping stone. How different is that from so many other places?
It's a huge cultural difference for sure. And I think it's one of the keys to American innovation. When you're not so terrified of failing, you're more likely to take risks, to try new things, to really push the boundaries. And that's where the real breakthroughs happen, right?
Right. It's like that saying, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. But that risk-taking culture wouldn't get very far without another element the article highlights, which is strong intellectual property protections.
Yeah, that's essential. When people know that they can profit from their inventions, they're more likely to invest the time, the energy, the resources to develop them. And that's where patents, trademarks, all these legal mechanisms come in. They create a system where innovation is rewarded.
So we've got this foundation of freedom, this land that's full of resources, this constant influx of talent, a culture that like encourages taking risks. But even with all that, you need people who are actually equipped to innovate, to actually build things, to run businesses. And that's where education comes in.
Right. The article points out that America has consistently invested in education, especially higher education and research, and it's paid off big time. Think about those university rankings. America just dominates them.
But it's more than just prestige. I mean, these universities are churning out highly skilled graduates, conducting groundbreaking research, spinning off, innovative companies.
Yeah, it's like this pipeline of talent and ideas constantly feeding into the economy. And it's not just the universities themselves, right? It's about this whole ecosystem that's built up around them.
Exactly. You've got research labs, tech incubators, venture capitalists. They're all clustered around these universities, and that creates this incredible synergy, this rapid back and forth between academia, industry, and government funding. It's like a recipe for turning ideas into reality at lightning speed.
Okay, so we've got the brains, we've got the talent, we've got the willingness to take risks. But even the most brilliant idea needs fuel to get off the ground. And in this case, the fuel is capital. Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting. The article dives into how America's sophisticated financial markets, especially things like venture capital and public equity markets, have played a really crucial role. They basically provide a way to channel investment towards really promising ventures, even ones that are high risk, high reward.
Right, it's like this giant engine for allocating capital, making sure it flows to the places where you can have the biggest impact. I'm picturing, like, those venture capitalists poring over business plans, trying to spot the next big thing.
Exactly. They're looking for those companies that have the potential to disrupt industries, to create entirely new markets. And when they find one, they can provide the funding they need to scale up, to hire the best talent, to bring that vision to life.
It's like they're betting on the future.
Right.
And that takes some guts, because not every investment is going to be a winner.
Of course not. But the American system is designed to tolerate failure. It's built on the understanding that some ventures will succeed spectacularly, while others will just flame out, and that's okay. It's all part of the process.
So we've got this incredibly dynamic system for funding innovation. But the article also makes a point that really struck me, which is the importance of the American market itself. I mean, we're talking about a massive unified market protected by interstate commerce laws. That has to be a huge advantage.
It's a game changer for sure. Companies in the U.S. can reach literally millions of customers without having to deal with trade barriers, different currencies, conflicting regulations. It allows them to achieve these economies of scale that just wouldn't be possible in smaller, more fragmented markets.
So it's like having this built-in customer base ready to embrace these new products and services. But
Yeah.
that only works if you have a system that promotes competition, right? Otherwise, you just end up with monopolies. So it's this delicate balance between allowing companies to grow and succeed, but also making sure there's enough competition to keep everyone on their toes. It's fascinating how all these different pieces kind of fit together.
It is, isn't it? It's like this giant, complex machine with all these moving parts working in harmony. But the story doesn't end there.
Oh, I know. We've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, like how the American economy has adapted to like wave after wave of technological disruption. And then, of course, there's the role of the government, which I know isn't always a popular topic, but it's clearly had a huge impact.
Right. It's about understanding how public investments, regulations, institutions, how all of that has shaped the landscape. And of course, we can't forget about America's global influence, its role in shaping the international economic order. That's a whole other layer to the story.
I can't wait to dive into all that. But for now, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll pick up where we left off and explore how the American economy has managed to stay ahead of the curve, even in the face of constant change.
So, when you look back at American economic history, it's kind of striking how it's weathered so many storms. Technological upheavals, wars, recessions. It's like this economic ship that's constantly adjusting its sails to navigate the changing winds.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And the article really dives into that adaptability, right, highlighting it as one of the core strengths of the U.S. economy. It mentions this term, creative destruction, this idea of dismantling these outdated systems to make way for the new ones. I got to admit, that always felt kind of abstract to me. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a powerful idea and maybe a bit unsettling too, right? Think about those old industries that get disrupted by new technology. The classic example being like horse-drawn carriages giving way to automobiles. Creative destruction says that's not just a loss, it's actually an opportunity. The resources, the capital, even the people from those old industries get freed up to create something new and better.
So it's like this constant cycle of renewal where the old makes way for the new and the economy as a whole becomes more efficient, more productive. But, I mean, that can be pretty disruptive on a personal level, right? People losing jobs, having to learn new skills.
Absolutely. There are always winners and losers in these transitions, but the American system, at least in theory, has mechanisms to help people adapt. Think about things like unemployment insurance, retraining programs, and even just, the cultural acceptance of switching careers. It's about mitigating the pain of those transitions while embracing the long-term benefits of innovation.
Right. It's like you don't want to cling to the past. You want to equip people to thrive in the future.
And speaking of equipping people, the article also makes a point about the role of government, which I know can be kind of a touchy subject. Some people want the government to just stay out of the economy completely. Others want more intervention. Where does this article land on that spectrum? It actually takes a pretty nuanced view. It acknowledges that the U.S. has always had, this predominantly market-driven economy. But it also emphasizes that the government has played a really crucial role in fostering growth and innovation.
So it's not about like big government versus small government. It's about smart government.
Exactly. The article points to strategic investments in things like infrastructure, education, and research as being essential. I mean, think about the Transcontinental Railroad, the interstate highway system, or even the internet. Those were all massive public projects that really laid the foundation for private sector growth.
Yeah, those are pretty compelling examples, like the government creating the playing field, right?
Mhm.
Providing those basic building blocks and then letting private enterprise just run with it. But, I mean, how do you ensure those investments are actually smart? Not every government project's a home run.
That's the key, isn't it? It's about having a clear vision, a long-term strategy, and being able to adapt to changing circumstances. It's also about striking that right balance between public and private investment. The article argues that the government should focus on those areas where the private sector might underinvest, like basic research or foundational infrastructure.
So it's about, like, filling in the gaps,
Right.
right? Creating those conditions where innovation can flourish. But even with all the right investments, you still need stability. You need that predictable environment where businesses can plan and grow. And that brings us to the role of institutions, specifically the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, the Fed is fascinating because it's so powerful, but most people don't really understand what it does. The article explains how the Fed's monetary policy, things like setting interest rates, have this huge impact on the entire economy. It's like they're trying to fine-tune this incredibly complex machine, keeping inflation in check, but also encouraging growth.
Okay, so break that down for me. Like, how do interest rates affect the average person? I mean, I know they impact like mortgages and loans and stuff, but what's the bigger picture?
Think about it like this. When the Fed lowers interest rates, it becomes cheaper for businesses to borrow money, which encourages them to invest and expand, right? And that can lead to more jobs, higher wages, just overall economic growth. But if inflation starts to rise too quickly, the Fed might raise interest rates to kind of cool things down, which can slow down borrowing and spending. So it's a delicate balancing act.
So they're constantly adjusting the dials, trying to find that sweet spot between growth and stability. But the Fed's not the only institution that matters, right? The article also mentions the importance of regulatory frameworks.
Yeah, regulations are essential, but they can be kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you need rules to ensure fairness, transparency, to protect consumers. I mean, think about things like food safety regulations or environmental protections. On the other hand, too much regulation can stifle innovation, create this unnecessary bureaucracy, make it harder for businesses to operate.
So it's about finding that Goldilocks zone, right?
Yeah.
Enough regulation to protect people and the environment, but not so much that it chokes off economic activity. It's like this constant tug of war.
Exactly. And the article argues that America has generally been pretty good at striking that balance. It's created a system that's relatively free and open, but it also has safeguards in place to prevent abuses and protect the public interest.
Okay, so we've talked about the domestic factors that have contributed to America's economic success. The land, the people, the culture, the institutions, but this is a global economy. And America has been a dominant force on the world stage for decades. How has that global influence shaped its economic trajectory?
Yeah, that's a crucial part of the story. The article dives into how America's post-World War II superpower status allowed it to shape the international economic order in ways that really benefited its own economy.
So it's not just about what happens within America's borders, it's about its place in the global system.
Exactly. Think about the dollar becoming the world's reserve currency, right? That means that most international transactions are conducted in dollars, which gives the U.S. this huge advantage. It also means the U.S. can borrow money at lower interest rates, which helps fuel economic growth.
Right, it's like having the world's most valuable currency. Gives you this incredible leverage. And the article also mentions America's role in establishing those international institutions, like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. How have those institutions shaped the global economic landscape?
Well, those institutions have played a huge role in promoting free trade, stabilizing financial markets, providing aid to developing countries. And while they've been criticized for sometimes favoring the interests of developed countries, they've also undoubtedly contributed to global economic growth and lifted millions of people out of poverty.
So it's a complex legacy, with both positive and negative aspects. But it's clear that America has played like this really outsized role in shaping the global economic order. But the world's changing, right? We're seeing the rise of these other economic powers like China that are kind of challenging America's dominance. How does the article address these like shifting global dynamics?
It acknowledges that the landscape is changing. and that America can no longer take its economic leadership for granted. It points to the need for the U.S. to adapt its strategies, to focus on areas where it has a competitive advantage, and to build stronger relationships with other countries.
So it's like a wake-up call, right?
Mm.
A reminder that the U.S. needs to stay nimble, to keep innovating, to find new ways to compete in this, like, multipolar world.
Exactly. The old playbook might not work as well in the future. The U.S. needs to be strategic, to play to its strengths, and to build a more inclusive and sustainable economic model that benefits all Americans.
It sounds like a lot to juggle. But the article doesn't just outline the challenges, it also lays out some potential solutions, right? Some key areas where the U.S. needs to focus its efforts to kind of maintain its economic edge.
Absolutely. It delves into things like education, infrastructure, addressing income inequality. It's about making sure that the U.S. is well positioned to compete in the 21st century and that all Americans have the opportunity to share in the prosperity.
I'm really eager to dig into those specific recommendations. But before we do, let's take a moment to just reflect on what we've learned so far. We've covered a lot of ground, from the foundational role of geography in the Constitution to the importance of institutions and global influence. It's amazing how all these different factors have come together to create this economic powerhouse we see today.
It really is a remarkable story. And it's not just about the past, right? It's about understanding the forces that'll shape the American economy in the years to come and how we can navigate those forces to ensure continued prosperity for all.
That's a perfect segue into the next part of our conversation. After the break, we'll delve into the specific challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for the American economy and what steps we can take to ensure its continued success. Don't touch that dial. Okay, so we're back and we're ready to tackle the future. We've talked about what got America to this point, but the big question is, how do we keep this economic engine humming? The article lays out some key areas to focus on, and the first one is education.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? I mean, everything we've talked about, innovation, adaptability, technological advancement, it all hinges on having a workforce that's educated and equipped for the challenges ahead. And the article argues that continued investment in education, especially in STEM fields, is absolutely crucial.
STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math, just for anyone who's not familiar. But it's not just about pushing everyone towards those fields, right? It's about making sure everyone has access to quality education, regardless of their background or where they live.
Exactly. The article talks about addressing those disparities in educational outcomes, making sure that everyone has a chance to reach their full potential. And it goes beyond just K through 12 education. It's about making college more affordable and accessible, investing in vocational training, and even promoting lifelong learning opportunities.
It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. If we invest in education across the board, we're ultimately investing in the future of the entire economy. But education isn't the only area that needs attention, right? The article also highlights the need for some major infrastructure upgrades.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one. America's infrastructure is aging, and in many cases, it's just not equipped to handle the demands of a 21st century economy. You know what I mean? The article is calling for significant investments in transportation, energy, water systems, and especially broadband internet access.
I think we can all relate to the frustration of slow internet speeds, right? But on a more serious note, it really is an issue of equity. I mean, in today's world, having access to high-speed internet is essential for education, for work, for participating in the modern economy. It's like electricity was a century ago. It's a basic utility that everyone should have access to.
Yeah, I think that's a great comparison. And the article makes the point that investing in infrastructure isn't just about catching up, it's about laying the foundation for future growth. I mean, think about the potential of things like high-speed rail, smart grids, or even self-driving cars. These are all technologies that could revolutionize the way we live and work, but they require a modern infrastructure to support them.
It's like building the highways of the future, both literally and figuratively. But even with, the best education system and the most cutting-edge infrastructure, there's another challenge that needs to be addressed, and that is income inequality.
Yeah, this is perhaps the most complex and contentious issue of all. The article highlights this growing gap between the rich and the poor. And the fact that social mobility that ability to move up the economic ladder, has declined in recent decades.
Yeah, it's like the American dream is becoming harder to achieve for so many people. And that's not just a social problem, it's an economic problem. I mean, When a large segment of the population is struggling to make ends meet, it drags down the entire economy.
Absolutely. The article argues that addressing income inequality isn't just about fairness, it's about economic efficiency. It calls for things like raising the minimum wage, expanding access to affordable health care, investing in workforce training programs that target those who've been left behind.
It's about creating an economy that works for everyone, not just those at the top. And it's not just about government programs, right? The article also talks about the role of businesses in promoting economic inclusivity.
Right. There's this growing recognition that businesses have a responsibility to create, good paying jobs, to invest in their employees, to be active participants in their communities. It's about moving beyond just that shareholder centric model of the past and embracing a more stakeholder centric approach that considers the interests of employees, customers, society as a whole.
So it's about businesses seeing themselves as like part of this larger ecosystem, not just like these isolated entities focused on maximizing profits.
Yeah.
It's a shift in mindset that could have a really profound impact on the economy.
It could indeed. And it's not just about altruism. Businesses are realizing that investing in their employees, investing in their communities, it's actually good for business. It leads to higher productivity, greater loyalty, a stronger reputation.
It's like this virtuous cycle where doing the right thing also makes good business sense. It sounds like the article paints a pretty optimistic picture. But are there any potential downsides to these solutions? Like, are there any unintended consequences we should be aware of?
Of course. I mean, there are always trade-offs to consider. For example, some argue that raising the minimum wage could lead to job losses as businesses adjust to those higher labor costs. Others worry that, increased regulation could stifle innovation or make it harder for small businesses to compete. These are valid concerns, and they need to be, carefully weighed against the potential benefits.
So it's not about blindly implementing solutions. It's about having this thoughtful, evidence-based approach that considers, the potential costs and benefits. It's about finding that right balance, as we've talked about before.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that the economy is this complex, dynamic system, right? There's no silver bullet, no single solution that will solve all our problems. It's about taking this holistic approach, addressing multiple challenges simultaneously, being willing to adapt our strategies as needed.
It sounds like a daunting task, but also an incredibly exciting one. I mean, we're talking about shaping the future of the American economy and, by extension, the future of the world. It's a challenge that demands our best thinking, our creativity, our willingness to work together.
Well said. And I think it's important to remember that the future is not predetermined. It's a product of the choices we make today. By understanding the forces that shape the economy and by engaging in informed and constructive dialogue, I truly believe we can create a more prosperous and equitable future for everyone.
That's a powerful message to end on. I hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the complex factors that have contributed to America's economic success, as well as the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. What stood out to you as the most crucial ingredient in America's economic recipe? And what role can each of us play in shaping its future? These are questions worth pondering as we all move forward. Thanks for joining us on this journey.